Hi, my name's Steve Aubrey, Product Manager for the NSP. What I'm going to talk to you today about is the evolutions of the NSP service fulfillment solution. We're providing a new dimension to the service fulfillment solution within NSP. That dimension not only helps us to improve the service delivery processes, but also provide the dimension of configuration assurance. And I'll take you through that in this presentation. So how have we improved? So we're tackling and improving the actual creation of the service attributes and the service configuration. So what we've done is adopted intent-based networking, modeling, and principles. The first thing we're going to do is actually handle for the planning guys. We're going to actually help them build the actual service configurations, either by using our pre-configured intent types for different service types like ELINE, ELAN, etc. Or even they can build those service intent types themselves, those service models using Yang-based modeling. We're also helping the operational staff for when they actually want to provision those services, deploy those services to the network. We're actually providing efficiencies around that particular aspect as well, and I'll present and give you more details through this slide presentation. But that new dimension, the configuration assurance, we're providing the ability for real-time auditing of the configuration of the network, of the configuration of the services, and any related objects to that. We're aware of configuration state. We've always been, NSP has always been good at operational assurance. That was one of its key points. Not just faults, but OEM, performance data, and giving you that real-time visibility of operational state. But we're now going to have configuration state. Yes, the service could be working all fine from an operational point of view, but is it configured correctly? And that's what I'm going to cover off. And that's what I mentioned, the new dimension here. And really, we're tying this also to the insurance side of the NSP. So it's actually more coupled together. So let's go through that in a bit more detail. So the first thing we've done is actually, as I mentioned, tied the service fulfillment components, with the assurance components of the NSP. So you haven't just got a siloed view if you're a fulfillment engineer and you need to switch to then look at the assurance. We're actually tying those two particular components together. Above that is the RESTful API, so a single REST-conf gateway. So your OSS applications can access provisioning services or assuring those services very efficiently through a single REST-conf gateway. Instead of trying to work out where they need to go, they go to a single gateway and make the appropriate requests into the network. We've got a dynamic service model, not a static model, You can actually extend this dynamic model in real time, in life of the NSP. You don't need to upgrade the NSP, you don't have to take it offline. You can update the dynamic model based on update the ELINE service model or your ELAN or your EVPN model dynamically, either separately or together. We've tied the two engines, so we're using one of the two engines within NSP. One being the intent manager, where we install either the predefined intent types, and I'll cover those a bit later on, but also the workflow manager for operational automation. So when we're provisioning services, we may need to automate certain practices like updating billing systems. We could be sending emails. We could be pushing out other configuration down to the network because you've configured a service. Perhaps we need a workflow to go and invoke setting up some OEM, some gRPC telemetry sessions, etc. We've got resource control. So really pool management, really tracking what resources are being used in the network, such as your VLANs, your service names, your VCIDs, etc. So we're tracking those in real time. So it helps alleviate any conflicts in the network. And then we have a highly scalable deployment and sync control across both classic world, classic SROS using SNMP, or through MDM for model mode SROS, or third-party equipment using pluggable adapters. So it really allows you universal configuration and assurance of classic and model world for services and the configuration through a single user interface and a single REST-conf gateway. And I'm going to cover that in a bit more details as we go forward. So really, if we look at the flow, so we got the designer tools, and as I mentioned, we're providing the predefined service intents to help off the shelf. And again, I'll cover that, I'll give you some more details on the predefined as we go forward. But that really defines the attributes of that service model. And in that, the designer can set up defaults, he can change parameters, he can hide parameters, he can change configuration forms as well. So operators can have, or users can have different configuration forms which reflect the services that they're deploying on the network. You've got the definition phase. This is where you define your service templates, your service catalog. And you don't have to use names such as ELINE, ELAN, EVPN, VPRN, etc. You can, but you can also define them. What is the end-to-end service? Is it a video service? Is it a SCADA service? Is it a power relay service or a multi-point service that you want? So use terms that your service fulfillment team will understand and actually reflect what you're selling to your customers. Okay. The fulfillment process through a very feature-rich UI, and I'll give you some example of the UI, but this user interface is totally flexible. You can design the way, the look and feel of the service fulfillment graphical user interface. There's complete span of control in here as well. So really, what can a user do on the user interface or through the REST-conf gateway? And I'll cover that again in more details. So we have increased control. We also have different life cycles of services. Where before people thought about a life cycle is a service either exists or it didn't exist. Now we have different levels of life cycles of a service. And again, I'll cover that in a bit more details, but really powerful life cycle management of services, which I believe will really help your operational, your service fulfillment team deliver the services and be more efficient on delivering those services. We manage the inventory of the network as well and the network resources within inside the NSP. So you can keep track of what services are on a particular access port, where a service is being routed around the network. And again, the assurance, that new dimension. With that assurance, yes, we have the operational state of those services and related objects, but now we have the configuration state, really looking at configuration drift. So based on the initial design of that service, the definition of that service and the actual fulfillment, is it still running as it was originally designed and defined? Really looking at that. But yes, you've got other aspects. You can look at the life cycle timelines of that service, but you also got full operational assurance tools as well, like faults, OEM, and reporting through the NSP applications. So if I just pick off some of the key advantages here, I'm sure you'll read this itself, but really key point is agility. In the context, we have one single service model that can be extended, modified, and customized. Where before it was a static, proprietary data model, we now have an extendable data model that allows you to extend it when you want to. So if you're actually just doing layer 2 services on your network today, and then tomorrow you want to do layer 3, you just install the new layer 3 predefined intent types, and that extends the data service model dynamically. You've got full operational control. As I mentioned, we have a very feature rich, and you'll see a little graphic a bit later on, but with access control. So what can the user do and can't do, etc. So real big control on that, but it's fully integrated again from the assurance. You haven't just got fulfillment, you haven't just got assurance, it's one complete integrated solution. So it's consistent look and feel across the network. We've got custom operations. So in the context, when a user is doing certain actions on the NSP, we can automate certain operational practices that are needed. Say, when they create a service or they need to invoke an OEM. When they delete a service, we need to clean up after that service has been deleted or removed from the network, etc. And again, I'll cover that off in a bit more details as we go forward. We've also got centralized service tunnel management, so your STPs between your SROS equipment, regardless if it's on a model-driven device or a classic SROS device, we'll see the tunnels between those networks. I mentioned also the resource manager on a preface side, so really that's looking at your IP pools, your RT pools, your RD pools, and you can extend those. There's 4 pools that we defined off the shelf, but they can be extended. So if you want a brand new pool defined with certain characteristics, you can do that. It's completely flexible and open. And really the key one again, that new dimension, is that service auditing. Really again, configuration drift. So really look at that new dimension, monitoring configuration drift, because that happens. And as soon as you've got configuration drift that's happening in the network, any upper layers can get impacted by that. Certain OSS solutions, inventory solutions, become out of step with the network. So if we become the source of truth for the configuration of those services, that means the OSS is in track. Your inventory systems in your OSS fully are aware what's happening in the network. And flexibility, mentioned it many times as well. It's totally abstract to the operator, to the OSS, if an SROS device is running in classic mode or model mode, completely abstract. So if one day an SROS is running classic mode, the next day it's running model mode, that is completely transparent to your fulfillment OSS solutions. Reliability and deployment, so highly scalable, high availability. We also, from a largest deployment, you can go horizontally scalable, but we also provide it from a small customer deployment. So the actual NSP sits on an NSP appliance, really thin layer pizza box that has all the applications you need on it to do to provide functionality that I've described in this presentation. And it's all backed up by a highly skilled professional services team. Just a bit of a view. This is not a comprehensive list of all the attributes that we support in the predefined service intent types, but this is like a library. You go to the library, which is on our support website, you go there and pick the service intent types that you would like, and you can just pick and choose which ones you want. You can see some of the attributes that we support off the shelf, like pseudo-wire switching, you got multi-homing in the EVPN, you got different VC types in the CLINEs, for example, you got auto-binding VPRNs and all the max routes, EGPs, etc. So a plethora of different attributes are supported off the shelf. And one customer that I'm working very closely at the moment, with the VPRN service intent type that they take off the shelf, we're hitting 84% of all the attributes that they need to deliver a successful VPRN service is supported from within that predefined VPRN. So it's only taking a number of days, weeks to actually extend that to the flexibility that they want to go forward with. So it just proves that we're looking at what the customers are using today, okay, and implement them in the predefined so they can actually get the actual NSP for their service fulfillment team up and running as soon as possible. Just a very quick here, just showing an example of a configuration form for a VPRN. This can be completely customized. This is just the predefined configuration form. If you want to change the layout, I'll describe that a bit later on, that can be done by yourself. You don't need to come back to Nokia if you want to customize it. Yes, we can help you, advise you, support you. We can even do it for you through our professional services team. But it's totally flexible that you can do it yourself. And one key point here is see that it takes you through steps where you put your basic definitions, then you do your sites and your STPs if you're going to do those. But what you've also got is the actual, once you drill down, we got breadcrumbs, so you can see that it makes it usable from a user interface point of view. You can see the different levels of parameters that we support. And really it gives you tooltips. So if you hover over a particular field, it'll give a little description of what's the range you should put into that parameter, and give suggest values, etc. So really aiding that operator. If he's defined a service for a particular customer, it will actually suggest certain parameters further on down the configuration form. So instead of him thinking, oh, what should be the IP address for that customer, it could actually suggest the IP address. You've selected that customer, Steve, therefore we suggest you use an IP address from this range, or use this RD or RT. You can use what we class as suggest functions. Just to go through what we've also provided from a fulfillment lifecycle point of view, really major leap forward here is really, as I mentioned right at the beginning, there's not just the state a service exists or doesn't exist. This is really giving us more granular control, not just me, more granular control, the service fulfillment team. So you can actually save a service at any point in time, because we realize operational staff, especially if they're using a graphical user interface, gets distracted. They get pulled onto higher priority tasks, etc., or there's something gone wrong in the network. So what they need to do is be able to save what they've done so far. It also could be they may not have all the information to hand and therefore they need to save that. We've got the planned state. So we can actually reserve resources in the NSP. Even though we haven't pushed it down to the network, we can reserve the service name, the VC ID, the VLAN ID, IP addresses, RTs, RDs. They can be reserved for that particular service and then deployed at a later point in time. But it also comes back to role-based access control. It might be that I can only save and plan a service. I need someone else to deploy that service. Or it might be I want to deploy it at a later date and have automation deploy that service to the network. So you see that there's the deployment state. We've also got the removed state. So you can remove that configuration from the network, but it still exists in the NSP. So that's pretty handy that, again, from a role-based access control, you can remove service from the network, but you need a higher grade operator to delete that service. Also on the far right-hand side there, you'll see there's a deployed modifier, and this is a massive, brilliant use case here, is where during the day you can make modifications to existing deployed services, but those modifications will be held inside the NSP and then deployed later on. And that could be manually deployed later on, or you could wait until 1 o'clock in the morning when the on-site engineer has got there to do some maintenance work, and then you push those modifications down to the network. Okay, could be a very simple use case where you're moving services from port 10 to port 9 in a particular location, but you need the on-site engineer to move that cable from port 10 to port 9. So why do it during the day? Because the cable's still plugged in, so the services continue working. But as soon as that on-site engineer gets to site, moves that cable from 10 to 9, what will happen then, we'll get a trigger to say move all services from a deployed modified state to a deployed state, which means all services there, all those modifications would be pushed down. So we're moving those services from one to another. Just to show about the service template, so where we're looking at the definition state, because we got the design, we got the definition, we give the tools to allow the operators, the engineers, to define their service offerings. And we can reflect the name, as you see there, I've given it a simple name of the definition, but you can actually, we've got Goose services, multi-site gold services. You can actually put the name, whatever is relevant to your fulfillment team. We relate this to then the intent type itself. So you see here, I'm actually using an ELINE service and a particular version of that. You've also then got the configuration form that we're going to relate to that. So whenever we ask for that type of service, that is the configuration form we can have or will use. And we can have multiple configuration forms. So based on user, service type, etc., you can have different configuration forms, and I'll show you that on the next slide. We also got from a workflow. So as the service using this particular template is going through different lifecycle states, like for planned, for removed, deployed, we can invoke different automation workflows. And this little example here is when we plan a service, we're going to invoke a workflow that will create some tunnels between the network, create some LSPs between the network. When we remove the service, we'll clean those up. But we'll also, when we deploy the service, we'll send an email to the user, to the customer, whoever you need it to do. So when we're actually customizing, what I mentioned earlier on, fully flexible user interface. And you see here, I've got the default configuration form, but I also got one here for TEPs as well. And what I've done here is taken the default, copied those, and what I've just done is put the MTU at a default of 1600 and made it read-only. So for every time I log on, for example, and I want to use that I use that configuration form, the MTU is already set at 1600 and I can't change it. But you can have another user that's deploying those service types, and he has a more open, flexible configuration form. And you can also, as you see there, change the attribute names. You can do a plethora of different aspects here. Okay, so again, fully flexible. Just finally now, just coming on to just service list and enability, I just want to give you, an overview of the views to your service fulfillment teams and your assurance teams that, you get a brilliant list, a page list of your services, as you see, all in different life cycle states, alignment states. You see on that one that's actually, okay, a lot of them are operationally up, but if you see that one that's misaligned, it's because it's operationally down, but it could be operationally down Because the configuration is misaligned. So someone's made some changes in the network on that service that's operationally taken that service down. So perhaps we need to realign that service from a configuration point of view, and that hopefully will bring the operational state back up in that particular case. You've got lifecycle state counts at the bottom of the screen here, so you can actually filter the list very effectively, find out how many services are removed, how many are in different states, etc. But you can get a nice little overview there. Very powerful, either direct individual or multiple service operations. So if you want to multi-edit services, multi-audit services, invoke workflows network-wide or on individual services, that is possible. Then on the right-hand side, just a really easy access of the full lifecycle history. So when was a service born? We always track that. When was it born? When was it last modified? When did it change the last time it went through a lifecycle state? So you've got all that historical data that is really relevant to find out, okay, when was it born? Is it down because someone's modified it in the last hour, the last day, etc. So you can pinpoint that very quickly through the graphical user interface. Finally, so hopefully you've seen from what I've presented to you here that the evolutions of the NSP service fulfillment application not only will tackle the efficiencies in service delivery and improve service assurance with really that new dimension to tackle configuration drift, which is configuration alignment. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.